Today, the first session will be talking about Azure Identity. So we have 3 sessions we'll be talking about today, and we'll be talking about firstly Azure Identity, that's Entra ID. We'll talk about RBAC, and we'll talk about MFA. So that's 3 things. I'm going to just explain each and every one of it. So firstly, Azure Identity. So what does Azure Identity really entails? So Azure Identity talks about who are you, who you are, who can access what, uh, how can that person access it, and the security of accessing that thing on Azure. So that's the whole concept of Azure Identity. It just talks about who is this person doing this action, so I can keep a trail of knowing that I want to know who is performing this particular action on this Azure subscription or at a particular time, and when did you access it, what happened when you did it, and so on. What permission do you have, and so on and so forth. So that's what we'll be talking about generally today. So firstly, we're talking about Entra ID. Entra ID. So for Entra ID, I believe you guys can see my screen. So for Entra ID, you go here. So Entra ID just talks about controls, access permissions, and anything that has to do with a particular Azure subscription. Let me start with the parameters I want you to look into when it comes to Entra ID. So one of the things I want us to look into in Entra ID. So Microsoft Entra ID is Microsoft Azure Identity. It's what we call IAM, AIN, Identity Access Management. Please note that word. Microsoft Azure Identity Access Management. It manages the users, the groups, service principals, and the applications also. You understand what it just does? Again, it handles authentication and authorization, meaning that in this Azure Identity here, that Entra ID, you can see under manage, you will see you can manage users, you can manage groups, you can manage external identities, roles and administrators units, delegates, administrator, and so on, enterprise applications, and so on and so forth. I will talk about virtually everything given the time being. Also, we will look at this common usage, how it can be used, and who can do what and what. So now let's firstly start with users. Okay, let's start the overview of it. So in the overview here, we'll talk about the manage tenants, when I want to manage tenants, review features, and so on and so forth. So most of the time, you don't need to get to all this. It's just for you to just have an understanding of what it really does. Let's go to manage. Let's look at users. Users talks about I as a person, I'm a user in this subscription. Do you get it? Let me give you an overview. So I am a user. My name is LG John. You get it? So under here, you see my user. You can see user name. This is the username. This is the user ID. You understand? In this subscription, please, do you get it? So I, as a person, I am a user here. This is the details of when you come to users, it lists all the users that are in this particular subscription, the details about the users, the sign-in logs, parameters of the users, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of details about users when you come here. You can just come here, look into what you want to do about users. So as for you, for instance, you are an external user, I want to get you to be among of my users in this subscription. I will just add you or invite you, you understand, to join this subscription. If you are an external user, I will invite you. If you are an internal user, for instance, you are in the same domain, I can add you as a user to this subscription. So this just talk mainly about user management. Please, do you get it? That's good. That's about users. The next thing again is about groups. So when it comes to groups, I want you to have this understanding of what a group does. Now, last time I talked about resource groups when we were talking about subscription management groups and resource groups and so on. So now I want to talk about groups in terms of users. For instance, you have Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C. You understand? You are all down to Mr. Z. So all of them are different alphabets. You get it? Alphabets that we have, and you can group them into consonants and vowels. That are two groups. Please, do you get it? Vowels is where we have A, E, I, O, U. That's vowels, and you have consonants also. So user permission, we can set user permission on a group. Like I want, like anybody that fall into group vowel, they should have access to do A and B and C. Do you understand what I mean? And people that fall into group consonants, they should have permission to do only one or two. They should not be able to do three. So that's what group entails. And when you have a group also modifies access control, modifies what can be done. If, like for instance, if I'm adding you to my subscription, I'll place you, for instance, I can place you under uh, group of users that can only create VMs. That they are, I'll talk about the controls. You understand? That's talking about the back. I'll get to it later in the video. So you have, I can create a group, and that group should just be virtual machine contributors group. So what that group talks about is that people that are in that group, the only thing they can do is virtual machine creation, modification, and so on and so forth. But they can't do anything that pertains to storage account. They can't do anything that pertains to service bus. They can't do anything that pertains to network management. But they can do everything that pertains to virtual machine because of I gave them the access of virtual machine contributor. I can now create group B and say group B be storage account readers, meaning that people that are in group B, the only thing they can do is just to read, to view storage accounts, get details about the storage account, and so on and so forth. They can't edit the storage account. They can't modify the storage account. They can't do anything more than viewing and reading the account, quote and unquote. And also, we can now say, okay, in a group, we can have something called group owners. You get it? So let me see if I get a sample of a group here. So let me see. Okay, let me look at this group. For instance, so under the group, so you can see you have group members and you have group owners. You understand? Group owners have a very high permission rate, meaning that they can do some things that the ordinary member cannot do. Just for instance, when you have a WhatsApp group, for instance, a WhatsApp group owner or administrator can be able to add users, remove user, and anything he wants to do. But a group member cannot do that, don't have that access. So when you create a group, you ensure you create group owners, and also the other people can be added as members. And also note the permissions of a group. Like for instance, if I talked about virtual machine contributor group, that group now, everybody, both the owner, both the members in that group, they have access to manage virtual machines alone. Please, do you understand? I'll come back and talk about our back where we have the other permissions and so on and so forth. So, but let's majorly focus on the identity part of it now. Okay. Here we go. We have talked about groups. The other one again I want to talk about, I want to talk about applications. Understand? I want to talk about applications. So in terms of applications, let's talk about enterprise applications. So in terms of applications, you just talk about it's loading. So in applications, majorly we are talking about service principals. So let me give you an instance of what that really entails. So for instance, I want to log into Azure, but I don't want to log in as a user. Do you understand? I like an application wants I have an application. That application goes into Azure to copy some files from Azure and paste it in a file and print it. Do you understand? Then we give you the instance again. I develop an application. That application, the only thing it does is that 6 a.m. in the morning, it goes into Azure storage account, copy something from Azure storage account, and takes it to my printer and print it. So when I walk into the office early in the morning, I just go to the printer and pick the printed out copies, and I go and do what I want to do. Get that concept? For my application to be able to go into Azure and get those details, my application needs to have something called a permission to log into Azure and perform that action. An application is not a person, it's not a user. So how does my application get that thing done? My application use what is called a service principal. Did we get that concept? Good. So a service principal allows applications to be able to authenticate to Microsoft Azure and get some permissions done. Please, do we get to that extent? So if it wants to do like my application wants to do a particular action, I can log on using a service principal, which is not my user, to perform some actions. So I can now restrict the actions the service principal can perform. For instance, I want that service principal to only have access to a storage account. I can now grant that service principal a storage account contributor or a storage account reader access. You get it? So service principal is not a person, it's not a user. It's just like an application access to Azure. So I believe we get it at that extent. I will talk about the other ones also. Okay, so let's talk about app registration was when I talked about service principals. So I will want to just give you a preview about it. So under app registrations, which are our service principals, you can create it this way. You can create a new registration. I'll just walk you through on how to do it. So I have a app registration, for instance. This one is expired. So you can see it's expired. So I'll just show you how to create a new one. So to register an application, you just follow this process, blah, 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 blah. And after that, register and so on and so forth. So you now have to talk about, I will talk about the access control later. So this is my own app registration. It has actually expired. So what I can renew it if I really want to use it, but it's best you give it a duration so it won't be misused. For instance, this app registration has been here for a while now and I've not used it. So definitely I'm expecting it to expire. You understand? Because let me just show you how to create a secret for it. It's complaining that my secret means quote unquote password. You understand? I can now say, okay, create a secret, this password have expired. Let me create a new one. I'll just guide you out. So these two passwords have expired. This one expired 2024. This one expired 2025. So let me show you how to create a new one. I won't be creating one now. I'm just guiding you through. So I'm going to create, let me just give it a name, XYZ, and also expires in the next how many days or months. I would prefer you can make it depending on what you want to use it for. For instance, if it's a lifetime application, quote and unquote, I won't advise as a person should give it something more than 6 months because of you don't want it to just fall into the wrong hands. You understand? And also for you to be able to know what's going on, monitor your application and so on and so forth. So you can choose the duration of months you want this to live for, and after it's going to expire, just like this one's also expired. After that, you just click on add, and that's all on creating a service principal or app registration. Okay, let's talk about managed identity. So when it comes to managed identity, that's what they said. Okay, let me just glance through all this. I'm just going to get a glance through on all this. So identity governance just talks about majorly about um, what your identities can do and so on and so forth. But it's not really of major thing until except you are in the governance aspect of Microsoft Azure. On that thing again, let me look at it. Licenses, app proxy. So many of all these things you may not need to get into it on the long run. But on that thing again, I want to look at again is password reset. So let me explain password reset for you. So, like for instance, you have a user in your subscription, and that user access, maybe the person forgot password or something. So you can now choose the way you want your password is set to occur for your user. You understand? You can say, okay, maybe when my users want to reset password, they should call me as a person. I need to reset a password for them. I don't want them to go around. Sorry, please. I don't want them to go around resetting the password themselves. They should call me. I should reset the password for them. That's on that way. You can ask them to reset the password using MFA. I'll come back to talk about MFA later. I can say, okay, I want that to be enabled for them, or I so that is the password reset policy and so on and so forth. So you have on that thing like company branding, user settings, properties, security, and so on and so forth. Under monitoring, you have sign in logs. So sign in logs majorly why it is grayed out here is because so sign in logs is you can use it for checking to check okay when the social person log in. I want to know the last time this person logged in and so on and so forth. This is just about monitoring your subscription generally. You have audit log, provisioning log, the health of the subscription, log analytics, diagnostic settings, workbooks, usage and insights. And so many of these things, the main things I just want you to put at the top of your mind is your users, your groups, your app registration, and you get this enterprise applications, and I believe that you'll be fine about that. So let me talk about managed identity now. So managed identities. No, oh, sorry, it's taking a while to load. Okay, so managed identity, I wish I can create one. Let me refresh this if it can. Resources aren't affected. So I'll just talk about it generally. So managed identity talks about uh, you have a resource that needs to perform an action. For instance, you have something called a Kubernetes cluster. A Kubernetes cluster is a series of virtual machines brought together and they are orchestrated to work together. Just, I don't want you to convince yourself with the English about it. You can read about Kubernetes generally. So, in that Kubernetes cluster, I want my Kubernetes cluster to be able to pull image from a particular container registry. Do we get that? For my Kubernetes cluster to work, it must pull what is called a doc for a particular pod or application to run. To get that done, the Kubernetes cluster must have access to that container registry to pull image from it. Please, do we access to do that? It won't be able to pull that image for it to work effectively. So it is something called a managed identity. So that managed identity is what the Kubernetes cluster will use as its own hand to get some permissions done. So I will now pick that managed identity, go to my container registry, give that managed identity that belongs to that Kubernetes cluster access to that container registry. Now, if my Kubernetes cluster wants to pull anything for that from that container registry, it is going to use that managed identity as its own hand to pull that particular perform that particular action of pulling. I have a virtual machine and a service in it. I want my virtual machine to be able to perform an action in, maybe for instance, in a key vault. My virtual machine cannot just get up and say it wants to go and perform that action or pull a secret or a certificate from the key vault. It must use an ant. For instance, I'm using the word ant. That ant it is using to perform that action is called a managed identity. That managed identity is what is giving permission to say, okay, I want my managed identity to be the one to be pulling that thing for me when I want that thing to be done. So that's what managed identities are used for. They are just like user permission or service principal, but in managed identity, there's nothing called username and password. Do you get it? In managed identity, there's nothing called username and password. In user, you have username and password. In service principal, you can have object ID, which can be the username, or and they have client secrets, which can be the password. But in my identities, there is no username and password. So I think I've been able to explain that also. Now we have something called uh, hybrid identity. I will explain what hybrid identity means. So you have some organization whereby they have on-prem services, on-prem identity. You understand? And they have cloud services. So they can combine the two using something called ADDS. I can come back to talk about that one. It's just big English. You understand? It's just Azure Active Directory processes. So when you are having hybrid identity, you're having identity on the cloud and you have identity on-prem, your on-prem applications. So you're able to manage the two together. It's called hybrid identity. So for instance, you have a company called company XYZ. They have physical infrastructure managed by Microsoft on-prem in their organization. The identity of the two is then they use something called hybrid identity. Um, Also, Lastly, I will just talk about before we go to our back. I'll talk about single sign-on processes. So those single sign-on processes, all those ones can be enabled using Microsoft Entra ID. Also, single sign-on talks about how users are going to sign in. Like I want them to sign in using this process and so on and so forth. So I don't want you to bore you. I don't want to bore you with that. I'm just giving you an oversight of it, so you guys can have a general understanding of what Microsoft Entra ID really does. But in reality, you may not be the one managing those things. It's just for you to have an understanding of what those things does and how they can be of help when you really need them to do some things for you. Thank you very much.